You know what is funny?
Huh.
First day of work, but it's remote. It's so anticlimactic.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Sorry, I was so focused on you saying anticlimactic that I couldn't.
you never heard that word before, or what? Like,
It's anticlimactic.
oh, okay.
It was one of those things where I was
No,
like, don't say it, don't
you're
say
right.
it, don't say it.
You're right.
And then I ended up sounding like an
I was talking about the climate, actually.
anticlimactic.
Yeah. Remote work is good for the environment, is what I was trying
Or
to say.
bad
Because you don't
for
have to
it.
drive to work.
So right. You're so right.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to Per My Last Email, the show where we give you the hot takes and tactics to navigate work life. My name is Kyle Heggie.
And I'm Kaila Lopez.
And we have another great episode. It's all about the first 90 days. I'm going to coin this episode, How to Lose a Job in 90 Days.
I think that is... Keep listening. That's not what we're talking about.
On the flip side, it's how to keep your
How
job.
to keep a job in 90 days. Love that.
But I had to do the how to lose a guy in 10 days.
That is fun. That is
theme.
fun.
Okay.
It was clever.
Thought so.
So I think that the first 90 days, guys, this is an unsexy topic. How are we going to make this fun? I don't know. You'll find out. We will, though.
Yeah.
That being said,
Make the 90 days sexy again.
I think that the first 90 days is super hyped up, right? Like everyone's like, the first 90 days matter so much. What we'll be talking about a little bit is like, is that the case? And if so, how to maximize it?
Okay.
But before we get into all of that, I would just like us to reminisce a little bit.
I see Kayla's face and I know some questions coming that I'm not gonna like.
Do you remember our first 90 days at Morning Brew?
Oh, yeah. I remember our first 90 days at Morning Brew.
How would you describe our first 90 days?
Unhinged.
Yeah.
Unorganized.
Correct.
But ultimately the best 90 days of my life.
I would not have asked for a better and more effed up 90 days. I actually, in preparation for this episode, went through and tried to find a 90-day plan for either of us. Could not. All I could find was day one Slacks of us already building our first project.
Yeah.
We had like 15 minutes of onboarding, and then it was like, all right, go do the thing.
It's also so funny looking at old Slacks because the communication is like so formal because you're like, I'm a new employee and I don't
know this. I don't know this
I'm
man.
like capitalizing letters in Slack. Are you a serial killer? Now it's just like, yo, what's up? What's Gucci?
It's so funny, but also because I was scrolling through our Slacks from like literally day one, Feb 1, 2021, by like Feb 5th, we were like, what's up?
Yeah.
Like,
it took us 4 days to become best friends.
It was so funny, and how we like the communication devolved so quickly. Yeah. What was so interesting and so unique about our first 90 days that hopefully you won't have to deal with is that we were starting both on the same day for a brand new project at this company. And there were people still like already working on the project, but basically we were like the implementers, right? I was on content, you were on community. And it was like, okay, these are all the ideas we've had. Can you guys just like do that now? Mm-hmm. And so basically it was like we started day one and they were like, we're launching our first 8-week product in 2 months. Let's go. You got 8 weeks to build an 8-week product.
Yeah.
And so we were like, our first 90 days were sprinting.
We were off to the races. And I think the company was like younger.
Much
and
younger.
more like scrappy.
That would never happen
and
now.
less like process driven. And there's pros and cons. And at the time it made a lot of sense. I mean, I think the funniest thing about our first 90 days, which maybe this is a tactic, which is stay flexible.
Yeah.
Is our first meeting ever.
10 a.m. on February 1st, 2021.
Our first meeting ever at Morning Brew. You got your first day outfit on. I'm in my Milwaukee kitchen. Like, you know, I did my hair all nice. I'm like, okay, here we go. First day of school vibes. We get into this meeting. I come on. I'm like so amped. I'm so ready to see people. Like, I'm sure they're going to be cheering for us. Like,
Let's go.
We're the new employees. And I enter what can only be described as a Zoom funeral.
It was devastating.
I was surprised everyone wasn't wearing black.
I was like, scared I was losing my job. That's the tone of this remote meeting.
I thought I was losing my house. I thought they were taking everything from me. I was like, what is going on here? And basically it was like all of senior leadership saying, we hired you to do X. It's still like in the ballpark, it's adjacent, but we're pivoting to Y.
Yeah.
And they thought we were going to up and quit.
They thought we were going to like, riot. We were just like,
I had no problem with it. I was like, actually, that sounds like a better idea. Let's do that. and we were off to the races. And so, yeah, I think staying flexible, you probably won't have as chaotic of a first 90 days as we did. But I think, one, it brought us together very quickly. And two, it literally was like the most fun I've ever had at work.
It was fun. But I think one of the reasons why it's like, first of all, it's like so fun to reminisce about this stuff because it was truly so chaotic. But it's also like the first 90 days for us were so important in setting the tone for the rest of our relationship and also like our time here at Morning Brew.
Yeah.
And I genuinely believe, even though there are things that I would have done differently, I genuinely believe that those 90 days set us up for the success that we've had at Morning Brew. And I think that allowed us to get into this mindset of like being super scrappy, like asking for forgiveness instead of permission, which allowed us to move very quickly. It allowed us to get a lot of visibility in the company. And I think that was fantastic.
It resulted in something really spectacular. So let's stop talking about us. Even though it's our favorite thing to do. And let's just like take a step back about the first 90 days. It is kind of this like business thing that everyone is super focused on. And I think I know why. We pulled some stats. 30% of new hires actually leave within the first 90 days.
I saw this stat and I looked into it and I was like, there's no way this is real. 30%, that's 1 in 3 people that you hire quits.
Yeah, well, maybe there's some bad companies that are pulling down the average.
No, I checked. It seems like a legit study. But I was like, that's so high. Have you ever had a situation where somebody has quit in the first 30 or 90 days?
I don't know if it's quit necessarily. Why I think these are so important is there's only so much you can figure out in the interview process. And we talked about that in our interview episode where you're trying to assess fit. And there's proxies to do that in the interview process. But until someone's in, you can't really know. And so I think the first 90 days is where the rubber meets the road, where you're actually seeing how someone is going to be inside of your organization. And I think it's pretty clear early on when someone's definitely not right. The rest, like maybe someone, if it's like in the middle, they might go a year or two and then you slowly figure it out. But I do think there's some where you're just like, oh, we messed up or they messed up and this is not going to be a good fit. And I think we've had situations where it was pretty clear early on someone wasn't going to be a good fit. And then, the process of them realizing it or doing the formal stuff you have to do to make sure everything's buttoned up might take more than 90 days. But I think it's pretty clear within 90 days if someone is not going to be a good fit.
Yeah, I still have such a hard time. Like in the interview episode we talked about, I believe it's like 27 to 30 days is the average length of an interview process.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the time to figure out. I understand, of course, when you're working, it's different. The day-to-day is different. But like you should get a pretty good idea in the first 27 days of interviewing. Like if the first 90 days are going to work out or not. I find this stat so crazy.
So do you think the first 90 days are overhyped as this big kind of thing in business, or do you think that they actually are super important?
I think they're super important because they set the tone for the rest of your time there. But I do think it's overhyped. Like if it's a flub, it doesn't mean like you got to get out. I think it's like if there's always time to fix the first 30 days, but I do think that they are important. What do you think?
I think they're super important.
Yeah.
And I think this is actually pretty spot on. I think one, like you only have one chance at a first impression. And I think you, as someone coming into a company, like you shouldn't be like, oh, I'm going to be here for 4 years. So these first 90 days, they don't really matter. Like you are really setting the tone for how people are going to perceive of you. So I think one, that's super important. Two, you kind of have this freedom to like be the person that doesn't know anything and be the like, I'm just asking questions person without it being extremely annoying.
Yeah, like don't be a devil's advocate or whatever.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I'm just asking questions.
If you're like 3 years in and you're like, I'm just asking questions, like shut up. Yeah. But legitimately, when you come into a new company, there's so much you don't know. And so you have this really great way to just slack pretty much anyone in the company and be like, hey, just starting out, I'm trying to figure out like how everyone works together and I really want to get to know you. Like, could we spend 30 minutes chatting? And so you have this kind of heightened ability to get a lot of context for the broader company, and you can't do that post 90 days.
I think you can.
Maybe if you're a little more like sophisticated. So I think that's what makes the first 90 days really important for the person getting hired. For the company, I think it is very important because it's kind of a check on the interview. And if you're going to have someone that isn't a fit, I'm a big believer in like you give them a generous severance package, but you fire them quick. Like, you want to get them out of your organization because you already know it's not going to work. Like, don't delay because there's going to be a ton of knock-on effects. So I actually think the first 90 days is super, super, super important. And I like that people talk about it a ton.
Yeah, I like the embracing the beginner's mindset of the first 90 days. But I do think it's 91 days doesn't mean you're over. You can't continue to grow and ask questions and try to understand more about the culture and, how the company works.
Yeah.
But I do think that the first 90 days probably is a good benchmark for that. Another thing as the employer I think is really important, which we kind of mentioned earlier, is that how you manage in the first 90 days and your relationship with your direct report when they first come on sets the tone.
Yeah.
For the rest.
100%.
And I think it's actually much shorter than 90 days for that. So I think probably the first 15 or 30 days is really important for you as a manager bringing somebody new onto your team. For example, when I had an intern who shall remain nameless, I was, trying to be this cool manager.
Yeah. You were trying to impress the Gen Zs. You wanted to be accepted. We'll never be accepted by them.
I will never be accepted by them, but it was so embarrassing. And I was just oh yeah, let's just hang, just do whatever,
Yeah.
It's gonna
deadlines,
be great.
They're just vibes.
Just just make great content and I'm not gonna follow up and make sure you're working at 3 p.m. If the work's done, the work's done, which I do believe in.
Yeah.
But I feel it's you should earn that, which I've learned now because she was oh, sick, and just didn't do anything for the entire summer. And then I had to have a series of really tough conversations with her, and it's not her fault. She just took the tone that I set. Yeah, she probably ran with it. And yes, if I had set that tone with somebody who was maybe slightly different, it would have been better for me. But it was a really good lesson that I learned, which was it was hard. And I was gosh, this is annoying.
Honestly, major slay by her.
It really was. Yeah. It really was.
But I think this point you bring up is really important, is that I feel like you can always give people more freedom later, but it's really hard to ramp up expectations once an initial expectation of the expectations has been set.
Right.
And so it's almost better to start a little more intense and formal and get in a really good rhythm and be very clear about what your expectations are.
Yep.
And then see how someone rises to the occasion. Yep. And then as they're performing, as you get to know them, as you build more trust, you can be okay, we don't need to make the one-on-ones this formal now because I know that you're doing great work. But if you start with hey, just kind of do whatever, what are they? They're going to
do whatever. You can't get mad at that.
Yeah, exactly.
You've set that expectation.
Exactly. And so I think, those first couple meetings, particularly with the manager-managee relationship, is really important. Yeah. I remember my first meeting with Robert. Yeah. I was super impressed because he sent me a document ahead of time that was all of the stuff that he was working on and what he thought I should be focused on. And then also I created the same document. I didn't know he was going to do it because I was used to the person who's the direct report brings that to the manager. So I created the same document and sent it to him, and he was wait, I'm super impressed. It felt like a Spider-Man meme where we're we both made this document.
We're both impressed by each other.
And so it was really good that I was I think a level set of okay, we're both taking this very seriously.
Yeah.
And I think it's a terrible feeling when you join a company and it feels they just didn't even care that you're here. No one's taking this seriously. You want to avoid that for sure.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you don't have to be super intense as a manager. This is going to be run like the military, But I think I've had bosses come to me basically be welcome to this job. It's going to be tough. I'm going to push you, but it's because I believe in you. I'm going to over communicate at the beginning. You might feel like it's micromanaging. It's just because you don't know what you're doing yet. And, as we move forward and as you gain my trust, I will be more lax.
Yeah.
And even saying that, which feels kind of weird to be this is how it's going to go. You might feel this way. It's going to be intense, but blah, blah, blah. It'll work out. I feel having that conversation and being super transparent about there's an end to this if you earn my trust.
Yeah.
Is actually a really great way to approach it and has worked really well on me in the past.
Yeah. I love that advice. And I also think there's, going back to the intern dilemma that you had brought up, I feel as a manager, sometimes you have this idea of someone comes in and you want to you don't want to push them.
Yeah.
You want to make sure they're comfortable. But I do think that a lot of people actually want the inverse. They want a manager that's going to be like, look, I'm going to be hard on you. It's because I believe in you.
Yeah.
And I want to push you so you can achieve your maximum potential at this company and in your future career. And the only way I know how to do that is to like kind of get on your ass, like really make sure that you're locked in. I'm providing critical feedback so you know what you're not doing well so you can improve. I think a lot of people want that. I actually think the problem is managers are a little timid and scared of pushing people. And so having those conversations early and making sure that's a good fit and making sure on the same page, super important. But I would lean into almost like, yeah, it's going to be tough because I actually think you're incredible. That's why we brought you onto this team, and I want you to maximize your potential.
Yeah, and I actually think that that is one of the best arguments for having a more rigid plan for your first 90 days as a manager, because you're able to say, okay, I hate the 30, 60, 90 plan, and we can kind of go into what that is, because it's just like, what is it actually achieving? But that being said, to kind of contradict myself, I think it's really nice as a new hire to come in and have your boss be like, I'm going to be super on your ass for the next 90 days to make sure that you're set up for success. Here are the exact goals that I have for your first 3 months. And the rigidity is actually almost like allows more flexibility, because you know exactly what your expectations are of those first 90 days. And so despite the fact that it feels a little formal, especially in like a more millennial skewed work environment.
Millennial coded work environment.
Yeah, or younger. It's like that rigidity actually allows you to communicate more freely. It allows you to build a better relationship with your direct report. And so I think there is something to be said for a very strict rigid 90 days.
Yeah, and I think you want to give constraints. It feels like contradictory, but constraints actually do sometimes enable like freedom and like innovation. Like you need to set the expectation for this is what you're supposed to do. Here's who you're supposed to meet. Here's what I want to see by 90 days. You're not dictating how they necessarily go about achieving that.
Right.
But you're creating these constraints of like, if you're focusing over here, wrong. Here is your lane, and this is what I need you to do in the first 90 days. I think that's very important.
And we'll be right back after this. Okay, back to the show.
The 30, 60, 90-day plans crack me up, though, because everyone is like so big on them.
Yeah.
You're bringing in a new person, and you're like, huddle your team before they come on. They're like, we have created the world's best 30, 60, 90-day plan.
Yeah.
Look at all these bullet points. Look at all the things they're going to do. And then on day 7, you're like, I don't even know where that document is anymore.
Yeah,
I think I deleted it.
It's been lost in the drive.
Yeah, the drive, it's gone. Like, I don't know. So I like this idea of creating a plan, but I think we probably over like document in the 30, 60, 90-day buckets. But yes, I do think you need to have clear expectations. You need to keep checking in. And you probably are wanting to be more of a micromanager in those first 90 days.
But I think communicating that is really important because especially if they're saying, again, I think this is a crazy stat, but 30%, 1 in 3 people will leave before the first 90 days. If they think, oh my gosh, my boss is a crazy micromanager, that could push them out as well. So if you're upfront with that communication, I am going to be checking in on you all the time. It's not because I don't trust you. I hired you for a reason. But it's because I want to make sure that you're set up for success. Then that might reduce that risk that somebody extrapolates what the rest of your career will be like.
Yeah, and just to add some stats to that, so 43% of people that leave in the first 90 days, they do because the role doesn't meet their expectations. So again, communicating expectations. 34% leave because of a specific incident. So that's, interesting. Maybe there is something that happens that's like, oh, this definitely is not the place for me, or I kind of need to leave now. 32% of people leave because the company culture is not a good fit. Again, we talked so much about the interview process is supposed to de-risk all of these things so you're confident coming in, but clearly there's still things that can happen in the first 90 days that make people leave, and you as a company want to eliminate those like as soon as possible because you spend a lot of time interviewing people. It's a lot of cost, and you can't be bringing people in that they leave after 90 days if you want them to stay. If it's not a good fit on both parties, that's great. I have a question for you.
Right.
So we both actually started new jobs around January here at Morning Brew. What would you have done differently in your first 90 days of your new role if you could go back in time?
Ooh, I think I would try to plan the year out a little bit better.
Okay.
I think because I was in this weird situation where I didn't really have a first 90 days because In March of last year, I started taking on some of the commerce responsibilities. So technically, I had been doing like 30% of my new job for almost a year prior. And so I felt like I was pretty like looped in. I kind of knew that part of my job really well. I didn't feel like I had to do the typical first 90 days stuff. With the other parts, I couldn't even foresee what those parts were.
Okay.
At the time, because consumer revenue it's like we didn't really foresee what that would look like.
Any revenue from consumers.
Yeah.
Like, oh, cool.
Cool. Great. So I'm going to plan out that now. And so it has taken a life of its own that I could not have predicted at the beginning, but I would have liked to think a little bit more critically about what all the options could have been so that I could have been a little bit more prepared when I started to see, okay, the revenue from this branch is increasing. I want to focus more on this.
Yeah.
That I could have known like kind of what the other options were there.
Okay. Interesting.
What about you?
I mean, not to pat myself on the back, but pat myself on the back. I think I did a pretty good job. And the thing that I think I did the best was I talked to so many people. I was coming into a new role as chief of staff. I was going to interact with a ton of more teams and business units across the broader business that I'd never interacted with before. And so my advice earlier in the episode, I took it to heart. That's what I did. And I just used those times like, hey, I'm stepping into a new role. I'm going to be like adjacent to your team. I have no idea like what you all do.
Yeah.
Like I've never really met you. Can we chat about what your role is and a little bit more about you? And for the first 2 or 3 weeks, I probably met, I don't know, 30 plus people
It was a lot.
at Morning Brew. One, it like helped me learn a ton about what other teams were doing. And two, it gave me a nice touch point that when I do have to reach out to people in the future, I'm not like, hey, I've been doing this role for 4 months. I've never spoke to you, but now give me this.
Right.
I have a relationship with them. And so I think that's really, really important. So I did that very well. Something I would have changed is maybe gotten on more of a cadence to like continuously check in, be like, hey, this was really helpful. I don't think we need to meet every week, but could I put like a recurring like once a month check in on your calendar until we decide we don't need it anymore? Because again, I think that gives you more routine touch points. But that was super, super helpful. And I think another tactic is your first 90 days should be a ton about listening. I think the issue that I've seen with they tend to be more senior leaders that come in is they've had success in their career.
Yeah.
And they kind of have this like business formula that they've figured out. Oh, I know how to do this because I just did it at this company. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to run the same exact playbook at Morning Brew and it's going to work. It never works because the environment and the context in the business is actually different. And so you can get into a lot of trouble when you come in the first 90 days and you act like you already know what you need to do. Because one, you're probably going to be a jerk about it. But two, how could you possibly, you actually haven't worked at this company. So I think you really need to focus your first 90 days at gaining the context and listening to other people at the company.
Yeah.
What are you seeing as your biggest problems? Like, oh, I was thinking about trying this. Have you tried this before? Why didn't it work? Like you want to get the context and then you want to adapt your playbook, which is earned and you have a lot of good stuff, to the new context. But there should be a transformation. Because if there's not, like, you just didn't do your job listening in the first 90 days.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think one of the things that I wrote down actually was HBR, the Harvard Business Review, had this 5 steps for the first 90 days.
Yeah. Oh, did I just write an HBR article?
You basically did. And I do have a bone to pick with HBR, which I think they can get a little bit too academic to something that basically you just described perfectly. But the 5 steps, if we want to like kind of break it down, is first define your what, your why, and your how of the role. So using all the information that you've gathered in your interview process from the JD, from what you know about the company, figure out what you think your goals are going to be for your year or however long you define it for. Number 2, identify all of the stakeholders that matter for your job. For you with your chief of staff, that was a lot of people, right? It was a brand new division. You hadn't spent a lot of time in the revenue org. And so you had to meet a lot of people to try and understand what it was that you were supposed to do. So once you've identified the stakeholders that matter to your job, meet with them. This not only like allows you to understand their jobs, their goals, their what, why, and hows, it also allows you to build a relationship with them, like you just mentioned. And then once you've done all of that listening, identify the key themes. So literally exactly what you said, the key themes.
I swear I didn't write or read this article.
It's true. I did my own research on this one. Identify the key themes that you're hearing and things to note or watch out for, and then build goals for yourself. Only after all of those 4 steps should you start to build your long-term goals.
Yeah. And my bone to pick with the common wisdom I hear for the first 90 days is like, get a quick win.
Yeah.
You got to get a quick win. You got to show them that you know what's up. And I think that a lot of people force it. Like, oh, my quick win has to be me coming with this revelation that is like, I thought about it myself. I think the quick win should be, I went and listened and I identified a problem someone else was having, and then I came up with a solution to that problem, but I didn't predict what their problems were. I didn't come in and boss them around.
Yep.
That to me is the best quick win, and it's the fastest way to engender trust. I want to talk about one more topic. Hopefully everyone in their first 90 days, it's beautiful. You got a great onboarding plan. You're communicating expectations clearly. You're listening. People love you. Claps in the Zoom. But what if you start your first 90 days and it's day 13 and you're like, I got to get out of here. Oh, this is not a good fit. Like something went wrong in the interview process. I'm not feeling it. Is it damaging to your career, do you think, to like leave after 45 days, or should you stick with it for at least a year?
No, I think you should stick with it.
Oh, okay. Here we go.
I know. I think it's damaging. I think unless you have, okay, first, if it's...
Lean into your take.
Okay. I think that as long as everything is safe and healthy and legal, right? It's really hard if you don't have a super compelling story about why you left. I think, it's the classic, the boomers are like, oh, they only spent 1 year at a job. They're job hopping. I think that same mentality is just for sure. If you're only at a job for 2 months, it's like, what happened here?
Yeah, I'm going to take the opposite side.
Okay.
Again, my take is like, I wouldn't leave a job if it's safe and healthy, unless I have another one lined up.
Yeah.
But I would not, like, if I'm 13 days in and I'm like, this is a bad fit, I'm starting interviewing elsewhere. I'm trying to get out as soon as possible. And I actually think it's cool, and there's a way to spin it where you're like, look, I have a lot of skills and I have a precious amount of time on earth, and I'm not going to waste waking up every day to go to a company that I don't want to work for. And I identified that this was not a fit early. Here's what I learned about what I would do in the interview process differently to make sure I don't find myself in that position again. And then I got out as soon as possible, got to a better fit, and everyone is happy. If someone can spin that around in like 2 months, I'm like, okay, this person's actually very self-aware, got a new job in 2 months. Like, they seem like a rock star. It's the like 8-month people that I'm like, wait, so like you probably knew this right away, and then where you were just like you just didn't want to get out and you kind of stuck around. So I think there's like an alternative story. You can tell if you leave right away that actually looks good in the market. And it just comes down to like one of those things, like you had 100 years if you're lucky on earth. Like, don't stick around wasting it if you know it's a bad fit. Like, get out, find something better. It's a win-win for the company and for you.
Yeah, I think what you've highlighted, which I do agree with, is that you stay in the job and you start interviewing. I think quitting and then going back to like perhaps not having a job and then trying to find something else, I think is really risky.
Yeah.
And therefore it's like the alarm bells in my mind are like, something really bad happened and you're not explaining that to me, that it was worth after 45 days you to quit with nothing lined up.
Yeah.
That's where I'm like, that's a red flag, and I think you should just stick it out and start interviewing for as long as it takes.
Great point. I agree with the red flag. Like, if you just quit and don't have something lined up, I'm like, what were you doing?
Yeah.
I mean, again, if it's like a fine work environment, you just don't like the job, I wouldn't quit.
Yeah.
Let's now synthesize everything.
Great.
And let's just give you all some tactics. Say I'm a new hire, I'm just starting at a company, first 90 days, like what should my tactics be to excel?
First, embrace a beginner's mindset. Remember, this is the shiniest and happiest you will be feeling at this job. Literally, unless you're showing up upset, which you shouldn't, like, it's all downhill from here. Take this opportunity to set the tone correctly. Take this opportunity to, ask a ton of questions, to meet a ton of people, to use your newness as an advantage. And set yourself up. Listen to as many stakeholders as you can, build key themes, figure out how you can make the most impact, and then execute on that as soon as you can. Yeah,
I love those. I think mine for someone that is just getting hired, everything you said, plus communicate the expectations you have of your manager. And if you are someone that wants to get pushed and you really want to grow, like, let them know that, set the tone early. That's really important. And then I think over communicate in the first 90 days. Like, keep your manager, keep your broader team really apprised of what you're doing. Ask for a lot of feedback, because they're going to be like, okay, this person's really on top of it. They want feedback. And that's going to carry over to your like past 90 days where people feel comfortable telling you the truth. I think if you're a company, we laid out the stats. Like, you want to avoid people leaving on their own. Like, they decide to leave within the first 9 days, because you just spend a ton of time interviewing people. It's costly. And so I think you do want to have a really good onboarding plan. It doesn't need to be a 30, 60, 90 formal document.
It's fine.
But you should have a really good onboarding plan. You should set the constraints so people know the lane they need to swim in. And you should ramp up the expectations and, you know, like, make them know that, like, I'm going to be a little more on top of you, but it's because I want you to succeed. I want you to feel like you have all the support. I think you're going to retain more of your employees, and long term, they're going to be much more effective at the company.
I think that was a great way to wrap it.
All right. Well, good luck on day 91, folks. We just nailed
You're on your own after that.
We just nailed the first 90 days. Thanks for listening, as always. And should we roll the credits?
Let's do it.
Our producer is Michaela Heck.
Our technical director is Ed Lewis.
Sam Wolf is our Associate Director of Production Services.
And our Chief Content Officer is Devin Emery.
This show is a production of Morning Brew.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
See you later.